Okay, well, I should back up one slide here, if that works, because this thing opened up in the wrong place. But anyway, this is starting off at the second slide. I do need to make some disclaimers before I get into this. These are my opinions and positions that I take during this presentation, and they're not intended to be absolute or authoritative or the final word on this subject. So I'm expecting some feedback from the audience, possibly some very emotional feedback, and that's quite all right. We can disagree. Be advised that when I talk about the beliefs and positions of Christians and Muslims or other theists, I'm not intending to represent all of them. I'm not going to paint them all with the same brush. So I want to make that clear from the beginning. If you say, well, that's not true of the sect of Christians, you would be right about that, and I would agree on that. So but I will be talking about some of the beliefs and positions that are taken by Christian communities. And I also want you to be well aware of that I'm well aware of the diversity of belief among these Christian sects. I used to be a Christian myself. So despite that fact, we're going to get on with the presentations, if I can get this to go. Okay. First of all, we want to talk about public perceptions of atheists. And I really don't care myself about the public's perception of atheists with respect to this presentation. There is a lot of negative public perception. My position is that atheism is not a philosophy or belief system, and therefore atheism says nothing about ethical standards or integrity, and atheists derive their own ethical standards from a variety of sources of their own choosing, and none of which have anything to do with belief in the supernatural. And public perceptions concerning atheists are heavily influenced by negative stereotyping, scapegoating, and dehumanizing propaganda frequently voiced in mainstream media. And this is mostly authored by religious leaders and institutions. So for that reason, we can expect public perception of atheists to be negative, even if there's no reason to view them that way. Now, the two goals of my presentation today is to encourage people to think critically for themselves about the critical and equitable treatment of others who are different. And the reason I mention others who are different is because we find it pretty easy to treat people who are just like us well. Our problem comes when we are trying to treat people who are very much different and perhaps even objectionably different. The second goal is to expose the contrast between the inflexible, dogmatic theist approach to ethics as opposed to the more flexible and reasoned approach of secular communities. The terms morality and ethics are often used by ethicists interchangeably. This discussion will use either or both terms in that context. And also, ethics are very controversial. So we cannot expect that there to be a single correct approach. However, most ethicists can agree on some commonly accepted principles. Ethics have to do with distinguishing between what human behavior is considered right or wrong. This and the expectation that right behavior is not harmful to others. and that wrong behavior is harmful to others. Some people think of morality in terms of personal standards, whereas ethics may be thought of as community standards. I'm not going to make any distinction between the two of those during this discussion, so I may use those terms interchangeably. Behaviors that unjustly or unnecessarily damage the lives of others are unethical. That's a very simplistic definition or approach to ethical behavior. That's my position. It makes it easier for me because if I try to go into very complex and complicated definitions of ethics, you get confused and lost. But for me, I aspire not to damage the lives of others, and if I'm not doing that, I consider any behavior of mine that does not damage someone's life, I consider that to be ethical behavior. This presentation will discuss ethics in general terms of ethical attitudes and standards we should strive to live by, in my opinion, versus pseudo-ethical attitudes and behaviors we should strive to avoid. This is the question, are we socially obligated to be ethical? And my answer to that is yes. We are socially obligated to be ethical in our treatment of other people. Ethics have value to society because ethics are grounded in the concept of mutual well-being. Communities require that we observe and obey many laws. Many of these laws are designed to protect us from others who don't care about the equitable or ethical treatment of their neighbors. We could rightly refer to these laws as ethical mandates. Pseudo-ethical laws exist under the pretense that they follow the rules of common social ethics, as if involving ethics when actually they don't. Pseudo-ethical laws are actually unethical in as much as they legitimize or permit behavior that harm people within the community who dare to be different. These laws are designed to deny freedom, equal opportunity, and social equity to oppressed minorities. Pseudo-ethical laws are oppressive inasmuch as they have no legitimate purpose in protecting us from evil, but rather are in deliberate attempt to impose religious restrictions upon the conduct of secular members of the community. While we are expected to obey these laws, we should be vigilant to recognize that they may be an assault upon freedom of conscience, freedom of choice, individual autonomy, cultural diversity, and freedom of religion. And those are good reasons to be vigilant and oppose pseudo-ethical laws. Now, I'd like to talk about some of the theist claims with respect to ethics. First of all, the theist position is that God is the source of all ethics and morality. And without God's guidance, humans are incapable of determining for themselves the difference between right and wrong. Well, this claim is without any evidence to show that to demonstrate that it is factual. And so the free thinker, the atheist, the humanist will challenge that and demand evidence, which they won't get. Another claim is that God's moral principles are objective. To make that clearer, the concept of objective morality is one where there is an absolute and universal right and an absolute and universal wrong. This claim also is without any evidence to support it, and we will later see that it has a number of problems. Another claim that theists make is that God can do no ethical wrong by definition. This apologetic reserves for God the authority to do as he pleases, even commit crimes against humanity without regard for the objective moral standards theists claim are obligatory to humans. So we have a double standard here for God, one for him, one for us. The Bible supposedly reveals to humanity the principles or standards of God's objective morality. It should be noted that Christians are incapable of providing a universally agreed upon list of God's objective moral standards. And every chance I get to have interaction with a Christian, I demand their list of objective moral standards. I've yet to get one. Another theist claim is that Christians or Muslims, acting at God's behest, can do no ethical wrong in carrying out God's mandates. Wow, this is a very dangerous claim. This apologetic reserves for God's followers the authority to commit crimes against humanity without regard for the objective moral standards theist claims are obligatory to others. As with other problematic theist claims, there is no way to confirm that a mandate to do anything is actually from a God. Another theist claim: Christians need not fear divine retribution for unethical behavior because they enjoy vicarious atonement for their misdeeds. And this applies to past, present, and future misdeeds. Wow. Since atheists do not fear divine retribution for their unethical actions, theists claim they have no moral compass or motive to do what is ethically right. Do you notice the contradiction here? Theists give themselves a free pass. They claim they're not going to be held accountable for the evil deeds that they do, and they don't claim that because they don't fear retribution, that they don't have a moral compass. But if atheists don't fear retribution from a God, we don't have a moral compass. It's a direct contradiction. I take note of here and now. We have some rebuttals that we can use against these claims. Contrary to the assertions of theists, no God or holy book is a source of objective ethical standards. We cannot find one. Ethical principles are derived from human experience, are subjective, relative to mitigating circumstances, and subject to change as human cultures evolve. Gods are not entitled to a might makes right ethical double standard that allows them to do evil under the pretense of being righteous, while believing they are acting at the behest of their God. History demonstrates that there is no crime against humanity that theists are unwilling to perpetrate. We have seen this over and over and over again throughout history, and we saw it on 9/11. We saw it with the behavior of ISIS in their extermination of other Muslims and other religious groups in Iraq. When they had the power to commit these crimes, they did not hesitate. And of course, there are examples of Christians committing these types of crimes in our lifetimes as well. So I'm not going to excuse Christians either. Christians are not entitled to a free pass that allows them to do evil under the pretense of being righteous simply because they believe they are doing God's will or are saved. I've heard many a Christian tell me that they're not worried about lying or any other, or fraud or any other crime, because they're saved and they're under vicarious atonement. It's all bullshit, sorry. Ethical principles must apply to everyone. No one gets to reserve for themselves a double standard. I want to talk now about the effect of secular ethics. And when I use the word secular, we're talking about non-religious. Does not necessarily apply to atheists. Could apply to a lot of people who are just simply non-religious, identify themselves as nuns. Or it could apply to some humanists as well. One of the effects of secular ethics is to ensure that everyone enjoys freedom of conscience, freedom of choice, equal opportunity, and social equity in their pursuit of happiness. This is not universally the case, but it at least can be the case. It also allows us to protect ourselves and others from those who would willingly harm us for selfish gain. Adopt an empathetic and charitable attitude towards people who are suffering. And I will make the accusation that this is one of the things that theists have a very difficult time doing. It also allows us to teach tolerance with a view to mitigate hate, tyranny, intolerance, and oppression at the hands of oppressors. And I will maintain that religion is intolerant, sectarian, and oppressive, and it does promote hate and tyranny. For one thing, it doesn't allow freedom of conscience. And secularism does expose, discourage, and vilify behavior that unjustly damages human lives. And lastly, nurture personal integrity within ourselves. And I'm going to say that this is something that religion actually hinders. Furthermore, the effect of theist ethics is to ensure that no one enjoys freedom of conscience. No one really enjoys freedom of choice. if they have their way. No one will enjoy equal opportunity, or that won't exist in society, because of some groups will be vilified and ostracized. And so therefore, there will be no social equity in the pursuit of happiness. And the effect of theist ethics is to guard against individualism or voices of reason that might inspire or demand change. Another effect of theist ethics is to adopt a hostile or apathetic attitude towards people who are suffering. I mentioned this before. And an effect is to teach intolerance with a view to promote and legitimize hate, inequality, tyranny, and oppression at the hands of theists. And this would even go so far as to amend state constitutions to deny equality to groups that theists consider objectionable. Ignore, encourage, and condone behavior that damages the lives of people who dare to be different. And this would have certainly, we can apply this to the LGBTQ community overall. And theist ethics ignore the lack of personal integrity within themselves. And that's horrible. Let's talk a little bit about pseudo-ethical behaviors. Pseudo-ethical behaviors are unethical behaviors thought to be in harmony with the goals of moral ethical standards. However, when scrutinized closely, we discover they undermine and/or violate the goals of ethical principles, which would be not to harm the lives of others. I want to mention the Nazis. The Nazi response to their crimes against humanity was threefold: admiration of the perpetrators, no condemnation of the crimes, in fact, apologetic justification for the crimes. They had lots of excuses. They had it coming. They deserved it. It was appropriate. It was necessary. It couldn't be helped. It was the right thing to do at the time. Critics just don't understand the context and misrepresent the facts. Well, we've seen some Muslim communities commit some crimes against humanity, and their response to their crimes against humanity: admiration of the perpetrators, no condemnation of the crimes, apologetic justification for the crimes. What excuses did they use to justify their crimes against humanity? Oh, they had it coming. They deserved it. It was appropriate. It was necessary. It couldn't be helped. It was the right thing to do at the time. And critics just don't understand the context, and they misrepresent the facts. Well, let's take a look at the Bible and its examples of pseudo-ethical standards that are, in fact, crimes against humanity. The Bible mandates killing those who work on Sabbath days, permits the practice of owning people as chattel, property. That's slavery. Mandates the killing of disobedient or rebellious children. Mandates conquest, genocide, and infanticide. Mandates killing atheists, infidels, blasphemers, and missionaries of other religions. mandates killing adulterers, homosexuals, permits human sex trafficking, forced marriages, permits sex slavery of virgin females taken as spoils of war, mandates gender inequality and the subjugation of women, mandates killing astrologers, witches, spiritualists, and fortune tellers. And I could go on, but I think you get the picture. The Christian response to biblical crimes against humanity is what? Admiration of the perpetrators. Moses is a hero, Abraham a hero, Joshua a hero, David a hero. All of the conquests were great. So they have admiration of the perpetrators and they have no condemnation of the crimes. And of course, they have lots of apologetic justification for the crimes. For example, they'll say they had it coming. They deserved it. It was appropriate. It was necessary. It couldn't be helped. It was the right thing to do at the time. Critics just don't understand the context and misrepresent the facts. Well, there's something to think about here. When Nazis, Muslims, and Christians describe the moral ethical bankruptcy of others, aren't they really describing themselves? Who has the moral ethical capital to condemn the ethically bankrupt actions of others while simultaneously making excuses for the ethically bankrupt actions of themselves or those considered to be their allies? Oh, does atheism offer any ethical advantage over secularism? Well, theists are unable to provide any example of how theism offers any moral ethical advantage over secularism or atheism. Again, atheism is not a religion, nor is it a moral ethical philosophy. It is simply a word defined as lacking a belief in the supernatural. Secular communities tend to have more tolerant and inclusive ethical standards than do religious communities. Or, let's see, theocratic communities. Due to their divisive and intolerant nature, theist religions are very poor sources of moral ethical principles. I'd like to talk about some moral ethical principles that I think are valuable, extremely valuable. I have no problem embracing them, and many other humanists have no problem embracing them. But theists, it seems, find them objectionable, very uncomfortable. And I'll give a number of examples. All people have an equal claim to certain inalienable rights, among which are life, freedom of conscience, freedom of choice, freedom of expression, equal opportunity, tolerance, and social equity. And no law, government, majority, religion, ideology, or prejudice can ethically deny even one individual equal opportunity to enjoy them. Wow, this is very similar to a tenet of universal Unitarianism, which I'm familiar with. But I've asked theists if they would be willing to take this to their church and post it on the bulletin board. And I have always universally received a negative reaction. Another principle: the only legitimate application of ethics is without pandering to divisive ideologies that capitalize on differences in race, ethnicity, national origin, philosophy, religious belief or the lack thereof, gender or sexual orientation. Wow. Would any church post that on their bulletin board? We must not subject others who are different to the kind of malevolent treatment that we ourselves do not wish to be subjected to. Well, that smacks a lot of the golden rule, but I haven't found a church willing to post that on their bulletin board either. Oh, we'll take that back. I have found a Unitarian Universalist church that would do that. But Unitarians are not necessarily theists. Ethics must include an uncompromising commitment to freedom of conscience, freedom of expression, freedom of choice, equity, equality, justice, and tolerance for all. These values must mandate the character of our faith and ethical standards. Now, is there any church that you know of or religion that has an uncompromising commitment to freedom of conscience? None that I know of. We must demand in ourselves the same ethical standards we demand in others. And you know what? I don't know of very many theists that would embrace that either. Any behavior that unjustly jeopardizes or damages the quality of life of others is unethical. That's a pretty solid foundation for ethics, in my opinion. Any person, group, institution, faith, philosophy, or religion who nurtures hate, bigotry, and intolerance for others who they view objectionably different only because they are different, and attempt to ostracize, disenfranchise, vilify, and or otherwise damage their lives. My position is that these people, these institutions, most represent the most evil elements of humankind, and I make no apology for that. Intolerance of hate, bigotry, tyranny, discrimination, and fascism is the ethical imperative of an inclusive democratic society. It is not an assault upon the rights of any person, religion, ideology, or institution to vilify efforts to practice or institutionalize hate, tyranny, and inequality. And I don't apologize for that position either. Oppressive individuals, institutions, or majorities have no legitimate ethical mandate to impose tyranny upon minorities that pose no threats to the rights or lives of others. Any person, faith, political movement, religion, scripture, church, or institution whose teachings or policies are divisive, threaten rights and or quality of other people's lives should be abandoned. Would any church agree with that? Empathy is the most noble of all virtues. It is only by way of empathy with those suffering, languishing in poverty, ostracized, disenfranchised, or repressed that we can achieve equity in our treatment of others. A single well-substantiated fact, irreconcilable with a belief, is sufficient to prove that belief false. I know of no theist religion that will embrace that principle, because it is their contention that blind faith trumps facts and trumps reality, and that no single well-substantiated fact can prove a belief false. There is no higher authority than reason and critical thinking. To question is the answer. Spiritual growth cannot occur unless we continue the search for better answers from a variety of sources. Institutions hostile to critical inquiry that use lies and sophistry to nurture absolute dogmas only nurture intellectual arrogance, impeding spiritual growth. I know of no church that would allow that principle to be posted on the wall or bulletin board in their church. Moral judgments require flexibility. Absolute dogmas, pseudo-morality, and inflexible rules fail to serve the interests of social justice. Wow, would churches allow that? Forgiveness is critical to social equity. When transgressors are sincerely contrite and repentant, they have taken the first steps necessary to redeem themselves. Society should encourage and respect reform. We must not subject reformed transgressors to eternal torment just because their mistakes were egregious and cannot be undone. Yet, and what theist nation or theocracy is there forgiveness? Any person, group, institution, faith, philosophy, or religion who deliberately spreads lies, suppresses truth, spins, exaggerates, misrepresents, or manipulates information in an attempt to manipulate others is ethically bankrupt. I won't apologize for that position, and that principle applies to every theist church in existence. Demagogic and simplistic answers do not adequately or equitably address complex problems. Every religion violates this principle. There are only natural and human solutions to human problems. Until we are willing and able to solve a problem, it doesn't get solved. Any reliance upon supernaturalism to solve our problems only impedes human progress. Quality reasoning requires that we have and apply a methodology for making an objective distinction between magical thinking versus objective reality. This is something that religions do not possess and oppose. Unsubstantiated claims should not be taken to be inerrant truths. Blind faith does not trump objective reality. Claiming to know things that are obviously unknowable and spreading those claims as though they are confirmed facts is unethical. In conclusion, ultimately, we are the arbiter of our own ethical moral standards of right and wrong. Hopefully, we will take this responsibility seriously and not allow ourselves to be duped into adopting pseudo-ethical standards. While others will attempt to impose their ethical standards upon us, our individual autonomy grants us the right to decide for ourselves what seems to be the best answer to this and every other complex issue. Our beliefs have ethical consequences that impact our lives and the lives of everyone around us. Okay, I'm going to end the stop share, and we are open for discussion. Can you hear me? Judy?
5 by 5, we hear you.
Okay,
I can hear you.
Yes,
we're open for discussion. People can raise their
In the
hands.
chat room, there's an awful lot of things to talk about.
Yeah.
I see there's 41 chats. Okay.
I have a question to start first, and that is, let me get it up here. How to reply or answer a theist claim that Adam and Eve are the evidence of human inability to determine right versus wrong.
Repeat that question.
How to reply or answer a theist claim that Adam and Eve are the evidence of human inability to determine right versus wrong.
Well, if you want to play their game, you can refer to the Bible in Genesis 3:20 through 22, where God says that man is become as one of us to know good and evil. And so God himself says we are qualified to make that judgment. But I don't like to play that game. But if I'm confronted by a theist who's making that claim that Adam and Eve are responsible, I will also come right back at him and say, yeah, and God told us that we are fully qualified to make judgments of right and wrong. We don't need God to do it for us. It says right there in the Bible, we are qualified.
Okay.
If God said it, I believe it, and that settles it.
Other questions? Feel free to raise your hand if you have a comment or question. No? Nobody?
So I wasn't privy to the chat, so maybe you could tell me what some of the chat comments were.
Well, let me back up to the beginning. It's a long way up there. You should be able to see it anyway, but
May I say something?
certainly, Helen. But in the future,
I'm wondering if what?
In the future, please raise your hand.
I know. I was trying to find it here. I couldn't find it.
Reactions.
Okay, I'll go back.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. I think a lot of things that in religion are metaphors for people who can't think very well. I mean, thinking really is difficult for a lot of people, and they use these hocus pocus of religion as tools for thinking, and they're like metaphors. Do I make myself clear? No?
Yes, you did.
Yeah?
You did.
Okay.
But a lot of the time, when it suits an atheist apologist, a metaphor is not a metaphor. It's to be taken literally. And when it suits an apologist,
right. Of course,
what is literal is to be taken as a metaphor. It depends on the moment.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Helen.
Thank you.
Did that kind of answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Jim Peterson had his hand up.
Yes. During your talk, Jim, there was quite a flurry of response when you discussed the matter of spiritual growth. And,
yes.
And you kind of glossed over that, but I'd be interested to hear your explanation of what that might be.
Well, I have always been spiritual. I was very spiritual when I was a Christian, and it may have had a different meaning to me at the time. At the time, I felt like being spiritual was getting closer to God. But failing to ever find God or have any mechanism for determining how close or far away I was, I ultimately evolved and decided that that was not a good explanation of spiritual growth. So when I became a skeptic and then an atheist, I still felt spiritual. I felt spiritual because I was motivated, for one thing, to be ethical. I wanted very sincerely and deeply to be a good person, to be able to leave a legacy of a human being that was worth knowing, at least. Even if nothing survives me, you do have your reputation that will survive you even for a time. And I would like to at least be remembered not as somebody who is morally and ethically bankrupt. Like, for instance, I think that the legacy that will be left by Trump is not something that he's going to, that would be appreciated by him if he had a critical thinking mind, but whatever. So I aspire to be ethical, and therefore trying to find principles, write them down that would help me achieve that goal, to me is a form of spiritually growing. And so the list that I gave you in this presentation is a list that I've accumulated over a period of years and written them down, and then later on somebody would say something, or I'd have a conversation that would trigger me to say, oh, that's a good idea, I need to address that, and I would write down another principle. So to me, developing character is spiritual growth, developing integrity. But I want to mention, while we're talking about this topic came up one time in a Unitarian Universalist group discussion. And as it went around the room and people weighed in on the topic, it seemed that every single person had a different explanation of what spiritual meant to them. And not one of them thought it had anything to do with the supernatural. They discounted that and dismissed that out of the way. They said, I have a right to decide for myself what spiritual means. And so from that day forward, recognizing that there's such a diversity among people, and they have the autonomy to decide for themselves what it means, just like they have to decide for themselves what ethics that they think they need to follow. I don't try to define spiritual for anyone else, just for myself.
Thank you, Jim. Rick Pearson has a question.
Okay, had to unmute myself. Mine's more just a couple of comments that have come up. Sam Harris, the well-known atheist, I have to look this up, I forget the name of the book. He wrote a book called Waking Up, A Guide to Spirituality Without Religion. He's a well-known atheist. I'm not exactly sure what his definition of spirituality is, but he has an entire book about it. My other comment was about the Adam and Eve thing. Before they ate the fruit, they did not know good from evil. According to the story, it's not until they ate the fruit, well, the name of the tree is what is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So you can't blame, the question was something to do with, don't Adam and Eve show that humans are incapable of making moral judgments? Well, no, because God created them without knowing right from wrong until after they disobeyed him and ate the fruit, but they didn't know what right and wrong was until after they ate it. Then they became like the gods, knowing right from wrong. So either way, I don't see where the Christians could use that. And after eating the apple, they know right from wrong, so they would be capable of making moral decisions. Before that, God created them such that they didn't know right from wrong, so you can't blame them. That's on God.
Good point.
It's on the tree.
Yeah. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil or something.
That's the blamer. That's the one to blame, the tree.
I thought it was Satan that tempted her.
The serpent, which Christians interpret, the Christians interpret it as Satan, but the Jews don't.
Okay. Brent Michael has a question.
Okay, well, I've always said that Christians are out of their tree anyway. So, but the real question is, why do we need the word spiritual when we're talking about feelings or even thinking or growth or whatever? It doesn't seem to really add anything, just add confusion. And it's, if anything, I see it as an attempt to claim some kind of false authority to what your feelings are. You know, it's like, well, it's my spiritual feeling of that. Well, what does that mean? And if it means nothing different than feeling, why use the term?
It has more than just feeling. It has meaning to the person who uses the term. And just as I explained before, I have to recognize that other people have the autonomy to use whatever words they want to describe themselves. They're not trying to impose anything on me, and I'm not trying to impose anything on them.
Well,
And when you take it from that approach, then you just say, okay, this person believes that there is something that is spiritual unless you ask them what that is, you're not going to know.
well, that's kind of avoiding the question in a way, because like I said, they're making a claim. The claim is there's something spiritual about their feeling or their decision or their thinking or their growth. And, you know, if they don't say
The
what...
problem, Brent, is that you are applying your definition of the word spiritual to them and their use of the word spiritual. And that's where you're going wrong. You have to set aside your definition and allow them to decide for themselves what the definition is for them.
In other words, it's meaningless, because if it doesn't have an agreed upon definition, then it means nothing. So
it means nothing to you, but it means something to them.
Well, it really means nothing to anybody.
If I might ask, when you say spirit, to me, that's saying something separate from your brain, as if that makes no sense to me, because it's all physical in your brain.
That would be the argument that a theist would make, but I reject that argument, because as with many words, there are different applications of words, and they have different meanings, those applications. And I would say that spiritual is one of those that I have discovered that I don't own. I can't dictate to someone else what spiritual means.
You're taking it from the opposite viewpoint. I'm not dictating what anybody else thinks it means. I'm saying they have to define it, otherwise it's meaningless.
If we don't have an agreed upon definition of what something is, where do we go with it? We can't go anywhere. And like Brent says, it's then therefore meaningless.
Well, you're free to discard it.
Thank you.
No one's saying that you have to adopt that term to describe yourself.
Jim Peterson wants to jump in on this, I'm sure.
Yes, thank you. I think that we need to take into consideration of the dual nature of what passes for spirituality. In the 19th century, there was a movement in this country called spiritualism, and they consistently tried to evoke ghosts, and that still continues even at the present time. And ectoplasm was a big thing, but I don't think we're talking about that. I think we're talking about a very rich, personal, emotional experience, especially artistic experiences that might be felt to be uplifting. They are not necessarily something which is subject to rational analysis, and they're not intended to be, and they don't have to be, really, because what it says is something about our feelings, and those are just ours. As Brent points out, it belongs to us, but in a way, in the case of an artistic object, and the feelings it seems to arouse over a broad swath of people. For instance, since 1827, the performance of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony has occurred in many countries throughout the world, and literally millions of people have sung it and felt themselves, or said that they felt uplifted by it. So I think one has to take that into consideration also.
Thank you, Jim.
That's
I'll
all.
call that off and not spiritual. But Amy has something to say.
Hello. I've always had a really big problem with the word spirit and the word soul. Okay. What over a lot of alcohol, I believe it was white wine, had a discussion with my cousins about this, and I came up with the word provoke. And I'll say something instead, like I always love the word inspiring. So I'll say that was provocative. And someone will say, that's just your soul. And I said, no, it's my provocation. I like the word provoke. I seem to be able to use that to say, and I even looked it up, and I think it means to move towards an action or an emotion. Okay, so I kind of like that substitute, because really that spirit and soul just don't have a lot of meaning for me, and I have a hard time, but I do feel inspired. And sometimes I hate that that's been kind of hijacked from me, because it comes from the word spirit, inspired. So I don't want to use it anymore, although I feel it is the most appropriate. Like, you know, art. What makes art art? It inspires, right? And I don't know.
As Jim Peterson pointed out, there are many uses of the word. For instance, many people refer to in the spirit of charity, or in the spirit of love, or in the spirit of such and such. So I'm not going to get hostile to the word spirit just because I'm no longer religious. And I can tell you that when I do something to help someone else in need, I reach out and touch the life of another person in a positive way. Sometimes tears come to my eyes. There's a feeling that wells up within me that I cannot explain. And that to me is a spiritual experience. Has nothing to do with the supernatural, nothing to do with souls or any of that crap. But I use that term
You've been
because
provoked,
it means
Jim.
something to me. I've been provoked, and I like being provoked.
Chemical reaction in your brain.
Fine, I like
That's what
it.
it is. Joe Reinhardt had his hand up a while ago. Joe, did you want to ask or comment? Or did he slip away? And somebody else had, oh, Helen, you had your hand up again? No? Did you want to ask or make a comment? Sorry, Joe, I didn't see you there.
I just agreed with the last statement 100%. In art, if I do something and it's for someone else and I see the light in their eyes and their reaction, I just feel so good inside.
Yeah.
And that's a spiritual thing, I know. Also, if you do something good for someone else, that person feels good too. And they, in turn, will do something else good. I mean, it goes on and on. I don't know if that's spiritual or what, but it's not physical, you know?
It is physical.
It's a feeling, it's a good feeling.
It's
Pardon me?
reaction to chemicals in your brain, that's all it is.
Yeah, yeah. Positive, positive, very positive.
Endorphins flooding your brain. It's
Yes,
human.
yes.
It's not,
Mhm.
not anything that's magical.
And so I can understand why people not quite understand.
We lost her. It's not me, she's gone. Okay. Anybody else? Joe, did you want to comment or anything? Since I didn't see you a while ago. No, you're fine. Okay. Jim, did you want to say something else? Oh.
I believe that Burton did.
Ah,
Slotnick had his hand up.
oh, okay, I didn't see it.
I've watched a lot of YouTube videos showing debates between Hitchens or Harris and one or another theist. And it seems very clear that you're not going to argue theists out of their beliefs. Rational arguments aren't going to do it. I think the push should be in education, in learning about a little bit about biology would be more effective. I have neighbors, good neighbors, next door to me, who are devout Catholics. There's no sense at all in my arguing religion with them. I mean, it would be a threat to their beliefs. It would only have negative effects on our relationship. It's not an arguable matter with them or with most people who are brought up as believers.
That's very true. I think the answer is science education, as you alluded to. My dilemma now is how to get adults to be interested in science. I'm sorry, Jim, if you would raise your electronic hand, I could see you.
Yeah, all right. Going back to Mr. Slotnick for a moment, I think those are interesting comments you made. And I'd be interested if you had any suggestions about how you can interact with people of strong religious values and beliefs in such a way that you can reach them, that you can share an intense emotional, quote, spiritual, unquote, experience in such a way that they can see the difference between claims about how they feel and how they express their inner feelings about an experience or a person or whatever.
I frankly avoid it. I mean, if someone says that they prayed for a relative or friend to get well, and they got well, and they're going to attribute it to that prayer or the intervention of God, there's no sense in arguing with them about it. I don't see what is gained except enmity.
I agree with you. There isn't any sense in arguing with someone who's committed to their. I used to be a fundamentalist, so I understand what. If somebody tried to tell me that I was wrong about it, I just got more defensive. And so I agree with you. The thing that I think we should focus on is building bridges with everybody. Find what we have in common and try to build those bridges and show them that atheists are not bad people, and show by example is how I feel about it. Any other questions or comments?
You could also make the argument that somehow it is within our nature or innate within ourselves to have a belief in some being greater than us. Every single culture has it, so it's not going to disappear.
Yeah, I think you're
Primitive
right.
cultures, advanced cultures. Look what happened to Russia when they tried to eliminate religion.
It can't be top down. It definitely can't be top down. I agree with that. Jim, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I did not address the issue that was just brought up in the presentation because I had talked to Joe Reinhardt about this issue about whether or not beliefs have ethical consequences. And is Joe still here?
Yes.
Joe, my question is, are you planning on doing a presentation on the ethical consequences of what we believe?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to address that here and now. The argument that I hear often from people who don't like atheist activism, and I'm not accusing you of being one of those persons, anyone here but being one of those people, is that it's a waste of time, that you can't change the mind of a theist. Well, I know for a fact that's not true. And I also know that by talking to theists, even though it is, the odds are very much against you, we're going to agree on that. There are usually other audiences that will be privy to the conversation, and some of those people are on the fence, and they can be reached. And so these conversations, while they might seem to be fruitless, actually have value. And I also want to argue that we have an ethical responsibility to challenge people which promote and spread false beliefs, because beliefs have consequences. Every crime against humanity that has been committed by a religious nut is a consequence of belief. And the only way to mitigate this kind of behavior is to challenge it. If you sit on your ass and you say nothing because, oh, well, I can't change their mind, the default is they think that they're right. So I feel that we become somewhat culpable if we are silent. When we see theists brainwashing children, dumbing them down with creationism, or teaching them hate for atheists, for the LGBTQ community, or for members of it, I have a responsibility. This is an ethical responsibility. If I don't speak up, I'm shirking that responsibility. I must speak up. And sometimes it's at my own peril. But I've learned it's a good thing to speak up, because there's other people listening usually, and sometimes they'll chime in and say, you know, you're right, Jim. This isn't right.
Thank you, Jim. Rick Pearson has something to say. Rick? You're muted.
Unmute.
There you go.
I'm not technologically savvy. I agree with what he just said. First of all, I was convinced out of being a fundamental Baptist young earth creationist by debating on the internet. It was facts that convinced me that my views were wrong. I also agree with him, for example, if there's children involved, like the parents have these firm beliefs, the children often don't have them, but they will eventually come up to have them. And if their views are challenged, for example, I know someone whose children were on that route. The mother was religious and was teaching them about God. The grandmother was teaching them about God, but the father thought it wasn't his business to try to teach his children. You know, it's not my job to contradict these people. Well, he finally stepped up, and the children rejected God because he just talked to them rationally. Like, you know, God is pro-slavery. I can show you in the Bible where it says that slavery is fine. You can own foreign people for their entire life. You can beat them as long as they don't die within a day or two. There's no punishment for you, all this kind of stuff. So it was reason that allowed them to change their mind and not become religious. Reason allowed me to not be religious anymore.
I support the idea that we have to stand up when policy issues are made, and we have to oppose it, and that's when we have to speak up. Fighting with an individual, I'm not, that is not like in Burton's situation where they're friends and it's not a situation where they're trying to convert him and he's trying to deconvert them. Yes, we have to speak up. I'm not advocating not speaking up. And sorry, Amy, I took your time. Go ahead.
You were reading my mind. I was like, she is just, all my words are just coming out of your mouth. No, Jim, I get you. And that takes a lot of courage, I would say, at least on my part, it would, to go up to a person and challenge their beliefs. Now, I do have a story where someone asked me extensively about, and I took a lot of time with her and explained, and you know, I asked her many times, I said, are you questioning your faith? Oh, no, no, no. She says, I'm just really curious about it. You're the first atheist I've ever met. I know you are retired, young, and fill your time with volunteer work. And so I can't say, oh, she's an evil, 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 you know, atheist. And I would have thought 100% that you were Christian by your behavior. And I, of course, you know, okay, sweetheart, but we are now really good friends. And part of me feels a little bit bad for making her think a little more, because she's definitely going through her period of doubt now. And every once in a while, she'll call me and she'll want to talk. And then I don't hear from her for a while, but we keep in touch on Facebook mostly, but she's definitely doubting. Her mom unfortunately passed during COVID, and you know, offering my condolences. She says, yeah, you know, she made a joke about how it would have been nice to have a stronger belief in God, thanks Amy, kind of thing, you know, because that would be really comforting right now. I do feel a little guilt on that, because I'm like, wow, if that would have gotten her through a really hard time, who am I to say? You know, it's not hurting me, it's not hurting anybody else, but if it would have helped her, I did feel a little twinge, tiny twinge, but of guilt. But yeah, going up to somebody and you know, getting in there. But there are some people who say, oh, have you always been an atheist? And I'll answer their questions. If they have more questions, I'll answer them.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's about it. And like you said, I do vote. I have speed dial of my local representatives. I already talked to Charlie Crist this week once. No, actually, there's a little hint I got from one of these, what do you call it, politicos, that if you call after hours, the staffers have to document your call, the subject, and inform the representative, whoever you're calling, you know, of the content of that. But if you call during the day and he's busy, can't talk to you, I'll call back, doesn't work. So it's actually expedient to leave a message.
Yeah, and if you try Rubio, you'll never get him. His voicemail's always full. Brett Michael, you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was going to comment on the idea of the comfort that people get. First off, that's presumably that they're going to the good place.
Right.
It's certainly not going to be any comfort if they're going to the bad place. And how does she know? Because no one really knows. The rules are so arbitrary and so ridiculous that basically that's not going to be any comfort at all to me. Not to mention the fact that false comfort, I think, is another thing too. You know, when you give somebody false comfort about something, yeah, that's not good.
Yeah, I agree with Brent. I think that living in the real world is much better at any level. And I do think that we do harm when we allow false beliefs to continue with someone who is exploring. I don't think you have, personally, I don't think you have anything to feel guilty about, because you are helping her in the long run. Joe Reinhardt has something to say?
Yes, I don't know who the author, excuse me, I don't know who the author of the quote was, but the argument that just because it makes you feel good is an argument in favor of religion is equally of value as an argument in favor of bourbon.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'll have another.
Yeah, I'll have a double.
Burton, you wanted to say something, or you're just agreeing with Joe? You're muted, so we can't.
I just have to say goodbye because I have to leave now.
Oh, well, thank you for coming. We're very happy
Thank you.
you came. And Amy, I see our required cat just made an appearance. So I'm disappointed it wasn't one of Eileen's, but that's okay. I would like to bring up that I was just reading an essay that Joe Reinhardt referred to, actually sent it to Jim and Jim sent it to me, concerning the damage that is done by allowing children to be taught religious views. Because, as I said, I was raised fundamentalist, and when I was in the Hellfire and Damnation Church, and I consider it child abuse. Jim Young, you wanted to say something, and go right ahead.
Before too many people have to leave, I wanted to mention that if you have a conversation with a theist, even if they're a member of the family, one of the things that you can do is to bring up these ethical principles that I placed in this presentation. And there's value in doing that, because you know in advance that they cannot embrace those principles, and they will feel an inner contradiction because they know they should embrace those principles. And while they might not admit it to you at the time, by your bringing up and challenging them with some of these principles, they're going to remember those, and they're going to be troubled by them later. I really believe this to be true because I've seen the reactions of some of the theists that I've brought this up with. So I keep this list handy in Google Drive, so that when I'm posting on the internet and I have conversations with theists and they'll attack me or attack gays or attack something, I'll just take and copy and paste a little segment, one or two of these principles, and paste it and send it back to them. It might be the simple principle that says there's only human solutions to human problems. Or it might be the one that says that anybody that spreads lies and misinformation is morally, ethically bankrupt. And if they're doing that, they can't handle it. It basically shames them publicly because other people are going to read it and they know it. Just thought I'd mention that. So if Rick has requested that I send him a copy, and I'm going to email that to him, and if there are others who want a copy of those principles, if you would like them, I'd be happy to give them to you.
Yeah, Brent just asked you for a copy. I
would
couldn't
too.
remember if you said Rick or Brent. But,
Well, Rick, and I guess it's Brent too as well.
If you want to send it to me, I can send it to everybody on the list. But,
Okay, I'll do that.
and Joe has something else to bring up.
Oh, yes, just in continuation with the essay that you were referring to, which is described as The Ethics of Belief, that was written, by the way, in the 19th century, and the author was maybe in his early 20s, very young, W.K. Clifford. I'd like to read it. It's only one sentence.
Okay.
It is wrong, always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything upon insufficient evidence.
Yeah. However, believers in religion are not going to buy that.
Can I tell you, James, one last thing I had to say is I
Sure.
really felt a powerful part of your presentation was the three what's the word, descriptors of the perpetrators that were the same. You brought up the Nazis first, and they did ABC, and then the next ABC, the same. That I thought that was really powerful. I thought that was really good. Made me think.
Thank you very much. And anytime you have a discussion with theists about the crimes of humanity perpetrated by the Israelites and at God's direction in the Old Testament, you will note those three things. They will admire the perpetrators, and they will not condemn any of the crimes, and then they will make excuses for the crimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Crimes like a wall.
yeah, and people forget that the Nazis were Christian. So,
Yeah, they were Christians.
okay, well, it's almost time for us to leave. If anybody has any questions or comments, let's go ahead and get them out now. And then I'll tell you who's coming next week, because I know Joe Reinhardt's very excited about next week.
Well, I get to introduce him, I know that.
Yes, you do. Next week, we will be having someone who is discussing, now I can't remember exactly what it was, the benefits of cursing, basically.
Oh, okay.
The science of cursing or something to that effect. But he will be talking to us about why it's a good thing to curse. And Joe Reinhardt is so excited about this topic.
Well, as you know, I like profanity. So.
Yes, you do. And so do I.
Are you a secret potty mouth?
As does Matt Dillahunty.
Yeah, and I can't remember the guy's name from the Satanic Temple. He loved his words too. I can't remember who did it.
Amy, it appears you're being attacked by a giant furball. What's that all about?
You know, I even use these Lysol wipes that they hate the smell of, thinking it'll keep them away. And no, they're still here.
We tried that with our cat. We not Lysol, but with aluminum foils. Also, he just threw it off and kept on going. I was like, "It's in my way. Get out of here." It's the obligatory cat. That's in every Zoom meeting. So.
My furball is sitting up at the front door saying meow and waiting to go for a walk.
Oh, okay. You have a dog.
The dog comes too.
Oh, okay, okay.
The dog gets a leash, the cat just...
Oh, the cat should have a leash too. There are coyotes running loose everywhere. You need your cat on a leash. Sorry to be dictatorial, but yes, you should have.
Well, I put my suggestion for a title in the chat.
Ah.
Maybe we should delete it.
The exquisite experience of expletives. That's hard to say, Brent.
Yeah, but it sounds good.
Yes, it does. It sounds very good. I'll suggest it to the speaker whose name I should be able to tell you. Let me just get this up here.
I prefer unexpurgated expletives.
The Science of Swearing by Ben Bergen is our speaker next week. So we look forward to seeing everyone. And thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Judy. And thank you,
Thank you,
James.
Judy.
And thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim.
You.
Bye.